So it's been quite a while since I've made any serious forays into politics. And I figured that one way of re-interacting with the community would be to make this. Now, I've been out for at least a year. I've developed in a number of ways, and I've also observed a number of things getting back involved with the political movements on YouTube. And so I figured that I'd give a almost summary video of what I think needs to happen. Because there are a lot of significant problems and a lot of significant taboos that need to be dealt with and ironed out. Because if we don't iron them out, I'm convinced it will stay very chaotic, not just on the quote-unquote dissident right, but in the world in general. Because we live in a time of chaos. I don't think that now is the time for the substantial compromises that are being talked about. Because I don't think that it's possible to judge the very short-term goods that could come from this. We could say in the short term these create good things. And the long term, because we don't know whether short term will be a month or 6 months or a year. We don't know whether the long term will be a year or 10 years or 100. And so likewise these need to be dealt with. Now, I saw on the distributor's channel, who I'm going to address this to because I think that he is somebody who fundamentally agrees with where I'm coming from and likewise the people around him. And I observed in a stream that he had the other day that he said that we shouldn't associate religion with politics because it alienates people. And I do agree. I can entirely understand why you wouldn't mention religion to, say, a coastal elite or a London banker, because they're not interested in such things, and they're often alienated by the ideas they're in. Of course, there is this pervasive trend that religion is something believed by the unintelligent nowadays, which is obviously something not true, but, people are stupid. Now, this obviously can't make its way into the politics very short term because of this alienating effect. However, I think, in perhaps contradiction to Dave, that this needs to be brought up at some point, and it needs to be dealt with in a big way. Now, why is this? We live in a period of time, we live in a society where people cannot agree whether a man is a man, or a man is a woman, or we don't even have a basic idea of human anthropology. It's complete chaos. And based on this, we cannot decide what would constitute a good law, because laws govern men, and they're there for making man's life better, be it as an atheist would believe in, improving his pleasure, or a Christian in the sense of extracting virtue out of him, etc., etc. And because of this chaos, there's no strong basis for government, so it collapses under that. There's no meta-narrative that sets the tone. And people are unwilling to discuss that because of the obvious offence that comes from that. But it needs to be done long term. We can have alliances with people who disagree with us on the fundamentals but agree with us in some policy. But the problem with these is that they're very easy to undermine by somebody who dislikes you. You can play people's fundamental truths off against each other. And this is a significant problem with the right. Because we have a lot of people who really quite strongly detest the progressive order, the cathedral, whatever you want to call it. But there is such substantial disagreement on the, what a man even is, what his aim on earth is, whether there is a god or not, that these movements will just fragment without that unifying factor. It needs to be dealt with. Even if it's difficult for some people and we alienate a lot of people in the process. Our decisions on God ultimately influence our decisions on man, therefore influence our decisions on laws. We're continually at war over this, and I think that on the right we're at least in a good place because we at least acknowledge the existence of such a being, although we may disagree on certain things. But to do anything stable and long term, we must resolve this disagreement. Now, this is going to start with the dissident right because they're the most open to these ideas. I suppose you call them angry young men, are very open to these ideas. We see this through the discussions of people like Evola, Guénon, and more theological discussions going on. Now, I can think of 3 steps that we need to do to deal with this, and obviously not necessarily in a direct way. As you've said in the past, Dave, we need priests and poets. But there are three things that need to be dealt with, and I'm going to call this a sort of smashing of the idols. Because in many ways they are idols in a very literal, biblical sense. But likewise, they're just things that are antithetical to good government. And the first one is the overemphasis on Evola. People on the dissident right pay a lot more attention to Julius Evola than you'd possibly imagine. People may be talking about Immanuel Kant, they may be talking about Hume, they may be talking about Schopenhauer, but the person who is known most amongst dissident right circles is Julius Evola. And he is somebody with a lot of very interesting ideas that do pertain to reality. But in his books, I've been reading through Revolt Against the Modern World recently, there's a lot of error in there as well. For example, he seems to take issue with Christians actually believing their faith. In addition, he's almost this functional atheist, because he breaks down all of the religious traditions and finds the quote-unquote primordial truths. But in so doing, this rationalization, because that's what he's ultimately doing, he'd of course vehemently deny this, but what he's essentially doing is rationalizing the religious traditions of the world, which is what you can't do that. He thinks that he has a big enough of a brain that he can break it down, and consequently people could take his ideas and build a quote-unquote new religion. In fact, the whole lack of a tradition that comes with Evola seems to almost desire this. It's pure and simple modernism, and people aren't willing to concede this because, oh, he talks about religion. Well, he can be wrong about religion as well, and he can be modernistic in his way he approaches religion. And so that needs to be dealt with. Now, that is one of the things on my agenda. I'm thinking of writing a book to go after him, because I think it's such a substantial problem. But he needs to be dealt with. Secondly, there is this science über alles attitude that doesn't just permeate the right, but permeates the entire culture, and it needs to be dealt with. Nobody really lives a scientific life. You can't rationalise your entire life. It's impossible, because, frankly, the world is too complex for you to be able to entirely intellect. Now, of course, you have people like Immanuel Kant who took that to an extreme, but the majority of people seem to think on at least a rational level, like a higher brain level, that they can just rationalise their way through life. No, that's not how it works. It's also an incredibly weak meta-narrative, because if all you're doing is running around collecting scientific studies to prove points, and that is what's building your view, then that's easy to destroy. Now, of course, a lot of people on the right don't do this, they're smarter than this, but a good chunk do. And so there needs to be this removal of the science über alles part. In fact, how they treat religion in this scientific worldview is very reminiscent of the Golden Calf. Now, I'm sure you can think of a number of YouTubers who do this, who try to say, well, this is good from a scientific viewpoint in this particular religion because it aids the evolution, it has a eugenic effect. And they say, well, it serves evolution and that's why it emerged. Now, this is entirely reminiscent of the Golden Calf, because the reason that the Golden Calf was worshipped is because the calf not only embodies work, but fertility. This eugenic effect of religion. And this cannot do, because it is in fact the other way round. The creation exists because of the creator. The creator doesn't exist to service the creation. You cannot say this, and so it needs to be dealt with. Finally, there's a hero worship that goes on. I'm sure everyone's heard of Bronze Age mindset. There's a very substantial number of people who worship heroes in this way. And this is, of course, another form of idolatry. Now, virtue is a good thing. All men should try to get it as much as possible. But hero worship is not the way to go, because these heroes are still fallible. You can't base a good political ideology on the actions of Julius Caesar alone, or Otto von Bismarck alone, because these were fallible human beings. Likewise, as the men who are running this movement are. You can't just have cults of personality determining political ideologies, because they're incredibly flimsy, because human beings are incredibly flimsy. So this needs to be dealt with. Now, to reiterate what they've said in one video, we need priests and poets. We need people who understand this and can get through to people without debate. Because I'm not convinced that the majority of the right, let alone the society at large, is interested in pure debate of these things. I suspect maybe 10% are, but the rest aren't going to be influenced by such things. And so they need to be dealt with through good artwork, good poetry, good entertainment, etc. So this is just my 2 cents. This is just a almost one take observation, and I'd like to hear people's thoughts on this, not just the distributist and not just those on the right. So yeah, I hope this was useful. Thank you.